Well, happy Passover, everyone. You know, one of the things that I find so powerful, compelling, chilling, also inspiring about the story of Passover, about the Exodus, about the slavery in Egypt, is that you really see encoded into that experience the Jewish people had for 210 years in slavery, so many of the prototypes that occurred throughout Jewish history being set there. We're told by the rabbis that actually the slavery was sort of like a iron furnace that the Jewish people had to go through to uplift Egypt, to strengthen themselves as well, to fix the evil in this world and make themselves almost like a vaccination, expose themselves so deeply to an evil so that they're able to go out into the world throughout their history and deal with evil and darkness wherever they find it. But also that the Exodus, the slavery rather, was cut short because of God's mercy. But there was more work that had to be done throughout the longer process of Jewish history. And one of the things that I can't help but notice is that there are these parallels in particular between how the Egyptian empire regime dealt with the Jews and Nazi Germany. But we see these patterns play out throughout history. But I made a video a few years ago finding such clear parallels between what happened 3,000 years ago and what happened just a few decades ago. And how, I'm sure you'll also realise as well, this is something that the patterns continue to emerge even till present day. I share this with you, not this video with you, and I want you to watch it, not out of a sense of sadness and to dampen the mood. Far from it, to realise that Jewish history is a part of a continuum where the Jewish people are staring evil and darkness in the face and being the light to the nations, light to the world, and coming out of it better, stronger, and having transformed and uplifted the entire world. We truly are the bush that burns but is not consumed. That is what Moses first saw, and that is who we truly are. Have a watch of this video because I think you'll find the patterns truly extraordinary.
Our Torah teaches us that the events of our forefathers, our ancestors, serve as a prototype for all of Jewish history. And with Passover coming up, and with us once again commemorating that story of the Exodus, I wanted to look back at the events of that slavery and persecution in Egypt and consider how remarkable it is that so many of the components that the Torah documented and wrote down about how it manifested share so many of the components that have occurred throughout the Jewish people's long and often tragic history of experiencing persecution throughout the ages. More specifically, one of our more recent and greatest national tragedies, the Holocaust. The story begins with the Jewish people entering the land of Egypt as citizens willing to contribute to society and work to its betterment. In fact, Joseph saves Egyptian society from famine and turmoil. And so it was the same of the Jews of Europe, particularly in Germany, where the Jews were in all the various professions, in all the different areas of German life, consider themselves so German and so deeply wanting to work towards the betterment of German society. Then, back to the story of Egypt, a leader emerges who creates this conspiracy theory that the Jews are trying to destroy the Egyptian society and culture, and therefore they need to persecute and subjugate and oppress the Jewish people in order to protect and preserve Egyptian society. The exact same thing happened in Germany with Adolf Hitler, who told these conspiracies that the Jews really didn't have Germany's best interests at heart, and really there was a conspiracy to control and take over German society. The exact same thing. Then the persecution and oppression did not happen in its extremities right away. It was a slow, gradual process of slowly convincing the society and then creating the mechanisms of state in order to persecute them. That's what happened in Egypt. First of all, Pharaoh just gave the Jews light voluntary work and slowly tied them in more and more and got Egyptian society to oppress and turn against the Jews gradually over time, and the slavery and persecution got worse and worse. The same was true during the Holocaust. Hitler created laws that slowly separated Jews from German society, that slowly turned Germans against the Jewish people. The final solution did not happen overnight. It was a step-by-step process, slowly separating the Jews from society, putting them into ghettos, and then eventually into concentration camps. Then there was the question of dehumanization, the kind of psychological games that they played with the Jews, which in some ways is just as, if not even more, of a trauma to go through. The dehumanization in Egypt was done in a variety of ways. Specifically, Pharaoh gave the Jews backbreaking labour, but the labour that they had to do served no purpose. You know, at the very least they could know that what they're building served some kind of function. But actually what happened was they created buildings and then they destroyed the buildings. The Egyptians got them to destroy the buildings. So they felt that all the work they were doing was for nothing, and that's a psychological trauma. The Nazis did the exact same thing, making the Jews sometimes do work in the camps for no purpose at all other than to make them feel like they're doing futile work. They played with their heads in other ways, shaving their heads, making them do things that would humiliate them, dance in the camps when they're feeling at their worst, humiliating, whipping them, shaving their beards off in public so as to play with their minds collectively. Then, what did Pharaoh do? He tried to get the Jews to turn against each other, which creates even more turmoil, because what he did was enlist some of the Jews to be part of the Egyptian oppression hierarchy. And so did the Nazis. They did the exact same thing, where they created the Judenrat and the capos, who were told, follow our orders of oppressing your fellow Jews or be threatened with gunpoint. Then the Egyptian persecution culminated in a genocide, where the Jewish baby boys were forcibly taken from their families and thrown into the River Nile. Similarly, of course, we saw a genocide occur with the Nazis. But more than that, it wasn't just a genocide in open daylight. It was also the fact that the Nazis tried to do whatever they could to cover up their crimes. Hitler never attended that Wannsee conference where the final solution was agreed. He didn't visit any of the concentration camps because he didn't want to be associated with it, and they tried to do it away from the public view, at least the annihilation part. So too back in Egypt, when the Egyptians took the Jewish baby boys, they didn't do it in broad daylight, no, they did it in the middle of the night, when the Jewish families couldn't really see what was going on. It all happened in the nighttime, in darkness, and then by the morning, their babies were gone, they didn't know where they were hidden at the depth of the Nile, so the Egyptians could deny their crime and make the Jews think as if they were going mad, continuing to play those psychological games and deny the very crimes that they committed. So yes, sadly and painfully, Jewish tradition is right. The actions and stories of our forefathers served as a prototype, remarkably, that repeated itself throughout Jewish history. But what does this all mean for us? It's remarkable, but what does it mean? You know, when God approaches Moses and tells him, I want to take the Jewish people out of subjugation in Egypt and into the promised land, Moses responds by asking, who are you and what should I tell the Jewish people that you are? And he says, tell them, I will be that which I will be. And what the rabbis tell us he meant by that was, just as I'm with the Jewish people in this suffering, so too I will be with them through other pain, difficulty and trials in the future. We're told that Moses saw a vision at that moment of all of Jewish history and all the trials and tribulations that we would face throughout our painful history. And God reassured him that the Jewish people would survive and he would be with them through their difficulty and pain. And what I think it's telling us is this: the stories of our forefathers is not ancient history. Jewish history is a continuum. And there's even something more deep that we're being told in this. The Torah is a story of a Jewish people taken from slavery to freedom. And at the very end of the Torah, they are about to enter the promised land, but they don't enter it yet as the Torah finishes. They're on the brink of entering that promised land, but they haven't quite yet made it there. And I think what it might be telling us is actually, on some level, we still haven't fully left Egypt. We still have not entered that promised land. Our trials and tribulations may come about in other forms. The persecution may come from different nations, but it's a continuum, and it's one long story that hasn't fully culminated and hasn't fully resolved yet. We still have not entered that promised land for our people, that promised land for the world. But the Jewish people, despite all those odds, are symbolized by that burning bush, the bush that was burning but was never consumed. That's our story, a people who have been burned and thrown around and tossed around throughout generations, and yet here we are. The bush that burns but is not consumed, that is who we are. So now what? We stand on the shoulders of so many martyrs, so many of our people who died simply for being Jews. And we can look back at that incredible story and stand atop the mountain as Moses did, about to enter that promised land. We're nearly there, so now it's our job to put out those flames, to create that vision for the world, that promised land that we, for so many thousands of years, have been trying to enter and are nearly there. May now be the time where we finally see our people truly enter that promised land and that promised world that we have been yearning for so long, that world of peace, of goodness, and of godliness.
Just quickly, we've all heard of heaven, hell, and the afterlife, and at some point I'm sure you've given it some thought. But the Jewish view is radically different from almost everything you've been taught, and once you hear it, it will change how you understand life itself. Have a watch of the trailer for our new JTV Plus documentary called Heaven, Hell, and the Afterlife, and you can watch the full film right now by clicking the link below in the video description. Across the world, the afterlife is described in simple terms. Heaven above, hell below, the devil waiting to tempt you, and a humanity born in original sin. But Judaism tells a story that is older, deeper, and far more hopeful. Less obsessed with fear and more rooted in purpose. A story where the soul is not born guilty, but born noble. Where the body is not the enemy, but the partner. Where the devil isn't God's rival, but his assistant, because Judaism has no second power. Where hell exists, but not forever. Where heaven exists, but not as the final destination. And where the real end of the human story is resurrection, not escape. Judaism views history as a mission, not a mistake. Other civilizations teach that we are here to earn our way into heaven. Judaism teaches that we are here to bring heaven down to earth. And to understand what happens after we die, we first have to understand why we're here in the first place. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to reveal the Jewish vision of life after death. One of the most misunderstood ideas, but if understood correctly, can transform your very understanding of life itself. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.